Most investors right now are positioned for a world that's already gone. They're sitting in the same stocks, the same 60-40 portfolio, the same just stay the course mentality their parents used in the 1990s, and they have no idea that the ground underneath them has shifted in a way that hasn't happened in their lifetime. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why one of the most respected investors alive is warning that we're entering a period he compares to a slow-building heart attack, and more importantly, you're going to walk away with 3 specific moves you can make this week to protect yourself, no matter how much money you have right now. Here's the thing. I've been doing this for over a decade, sitting across kitchen tables with real people, looking at real numbers, helping real families figure out how to not just survive, but actually build something. And in all that time, I've rarely seen this many smart, capable people feel this confused about what's actually happening with their money. You're working hard, you're paying your bills, maybe you're even doing everything right, contributing to your 401k, avoiding credit card debt, trying to save. And yet there's this nagging feeling that something bigger is going on, something that the headlines aren't quite explaining to you in a way that makes sense. That feeling? It's not in your head. It's real. And today I want to walk you through it, calmly, without the panic, without the doom and gloom YouTube thumbnail energy, just straight talk about what's actually happening and what it means for you. Let's start with the man who's been making waves in financial circles lately, Ray Dalio. Now, if you don't know who he is, here's the short version. He built Bridgewater Associates from a 2-bedroom apartment into the largest hedge fund in the world. He spent over 50 years studying economic cycles, going back 500 years, looking at how empires and economies rise and fall. This isn't a guy who screams, "The sky is falling," for clicks. This is a guy who built his entire career on cold, hard pattern recognition. And lately, he's been sounding an alarm that I think every single person watching this video needs to understand, because it doesn't just affect Wall Street. It affects your grocery bill. It affects your mortgage rate. It affects whether the dollars sitting in your savings account are actually going to be worth what you think they're worth 10 years from now. Dalio's core warning comes down to something he calls the big debt cycle. And stay with me here, because the next part is where it gets really interesting, even if it sounds technical at first. Think about how a country's economy works almost like your own household budget, except with a few extra superpowers that you and I don't have. When a government spends more than it brings in, and right now, the U.S. is spending around $7 trillion a year while only collecting about $5 trillion in revenue. That gap has to be filled somehow. For you and me, when we overspend, we put it on a credit card or we borrow from a bank. For the federal government, they do something similar. They issue bonds, basically I owe us, and investors around the world buy them. For decades, this worked fine because there was always enough demand for those I owe us. Other countries wanted to hold U.S. debt because the dollar was the safest, most trusted currency on the planet. But here's what most people watching financial news don't fully grasp. That demand has been shifting. Foreign buyers, countries that used to scoop up huge amounts of U.S. debt, have been pulling back. And when the people you're borrowing from start getting nervous, you have 2 choices. Pay them more to keep lending to you, which means higher interest rates, or find another way to cover the gap. Dalio has pointed out that the U.S. now pays somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 trillion a year just in interest on the debt, not paying down the debt itself, just the interest. That's more than the entire U.S. defense budget. Let that sink in for a second. We are now spending more just to service old debt than we spend on the military. That's not a political statement, by the way. That's just math. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's a government problem, not my problem. I want to gently push back on that because here's where it gets personal. When a government has that much debt and that much pressure, there are really only a few paths forward, historically speaking. They can cut spending dramatically, which is politically brutal and rarely happens at the scale needed. They can raise taxes significantly. Or, and this is the one Dalio focuses on the most, the central bank can essentially create more money to help cover the gap. And when you create more money without creating more actual goods and services to match it, what happens? Each dollar becomes worth a little less. That's inflation. That's the silent tax that doesn't show up on your pay stub but absolutely shows up at the grocery store, at the gas pump, and on your rent. This is the part most people skip, so let me say it slowly. Inflation isn't just an abstract economic term you hear on the news. It's the reason a cart of groceries that cost you $80 a few years ago now costs you well over $100. It's the reason your parents could buy a starter home on a single income in a way that feels almost impossible for a lot of people today. Dalio's argument is that we are in the later stages of this cycle, not at the very end, but late enough that the warning signs are flashing in a way they haven't in a long time. He's even used the phrase debt death spiral to describe what happens when a government has to borrow more and more just to pay the interest on what it already owes. It becomes a loop that feeds itself. Now look, I want to be really clear about something, because I take this seriously and I don't want to mislead you. No one, not Dalio, not me, not any analyst on television, can tell you with certainty exactly when or how this plays out. Anyone who tells you they know the exact date of a crash is, frankly, blowing smoke. What we can do is look at the pattern, understand the pressure building in the system, and make smart defensive moves with our own personal finances regardless of how the bigger picture unfolds. That's really what this video is about, not predicting doom, preparing for resilience. So let's talk about what this actually means for someone like you. Someone making, let's say, somewhere between $40,000 and $150,000 a year, juggling bills, trying to save, maybe carrying some student loan debt, maybe worried about whether Social Security is even going to be there when you retire. Because honestly, that worry is valid. The Social Security trustees have been pretty transparent for years that the trust fund is facing long-term funding pressure, and I think it's irresponsible for anyone in my position to pretend that's not a real conversation happening in Washington. I'm not saying Social Security disappears. I'm saying you cannot build your entire retirement plan around the assumption that it will cover everything you need. You need your own engine. And this is where I want you to really hear this, because this is the part most finance content skips entirely. In a period like Dalio describes, one with currency pressure, rising debt costs, and economic uncertainty, cash sitting in a regular checking account is quietly one of the worst places for your money to be. Now, don't panic and don't do anything rash. I'm not saying pull your money out of the bank. Your deposits up to $250,000 per depositor, per insured bank, are protected by FDIC insurance, and that protection is real and it matters. What I am saying is that money sitting completely idle, earning little to nothing, is slowly losing purchasing power every single year that inflation runs hotter than your return. That's not fear-mongering. That's just arithmetic. So what do you actually do? Let's get practical, because I promised you actionable steps, not just doom and gloom. Stay with me, because this is where it gets really useful. First, and I cannot stress this enough, build or strengthen your emergency fund, but don't let it just sit in a zero-interest checking account. High-yield savings accounts, which are widely available at most online banks, have been offering meaningfully higher returns than traditional brick-and-mortar savings accounts. The exact rate moves with the broader interest rate environment, so I won't give you a specific number that'll be outdated by the time you watch this. But the principle holds. Shop around. Don't let your safety net quietly lose value while you're not looking. Second, and this is the part most people genuinely get wrong, don't abandon long-term investing just because the headlines feel scary. Historically, the U.S. stock market, represented by something like the S&P 500, has weathered wars, recessions, pandemics, and yes, debt crises, and investors who stayed disciplined and kept contributing through the noise have generally come out ahead over long stretches of time. This is for educational purposes, and I want to say this clearly. I'm not telling you to buy any specific stock right now, and past performance never guarantees future results. But the historical pattern of staying invested through uncertainty rather than panic selling is one of the most well-documented principles in personal finance. Many financial experts suggest that trying to time the market, jumping out during scary headlines and jumping back in once things feel safe, actually hurts most investors more than it helps, because you tend to miss the recovery days, which are often the best days. Third, and this one's close to my heart, max out the tax-advantaged accounts available to you before you do almost anything else with extra savings. For 2026, the IRS allows you to contribute up to $24,500 to a 401k if you're under 50, and up to $7,500 to an IRA, whether traditional or Roth. Always check the latest IRS guidelines because these numbers do get adjusted. If your employer offers any kind of match on your 401k contributions, that match is, in my opinion, one of the closest things to free money that exists in personal finance, and not capturing it is leaving real dollars on the table every single year. Fourth, and this is the part Dalio himself emphasizes again and again, diversification matters more in uncertain times, not less. He's talked about how a lot of investors make the mistake of piling into whatever feels exciting right now, without paying attention to price or balance. I see this pattern constantly. People get emotionally attached to one type of investment because it's done well recently, and they forget that concentration, even in something that feels safe, is still risk. A well-structured, diversified portfolio, spread across different types of assets, not just one hot sector, is boring. It is genuinely boring. And boring, historically, tends to survive. Now here's that number I promised you earlier, the one I said would change how you think about all of this. Dalio has pointed to the gap between deficit spending and the size of the economy, the deficit as a percentage of GDP, as one of the most important numbers to watch. He and others have suggested getting that number down toward around 3% as a meaningful, healthier target. Right now, current projections from the Congressional Budget Office put the federal deficit well above that, in the range of close to $2 trillion for this fiscal year alone. That gap, between where we are and where economists generally agree we'd need to be for long-term stability, is the entire story. It's the reason for the interest payments, the reason for the pressure on the dollar, and the reason this conversation matters to your wallet, not just to economists on television. And honestly, this is the part that frustrates me the most, because this is information that should be taught in every high school in America. Most people graduate high school without ever learning how compound interest works, let alone how a national debt cycle trickles down into their grocery bill. I've spoken with thousands of people over the years who feel like they're bad with money, when really, no one ever sat down and explained any of this to them in plain English. You're not bad with money. You were never given the manual. Let me also gently address something, because I think it matters for your peace of mind. There is a meaningful difference between the U.S. government defaulting on its debt and the dollar gradually losing purchasing power. Dalio himself has made this distinction. A hard default, where the U.S. simply refuses to pay back what it owes, is widely viewed as extremely unlikely, given the unique tools a government with its own currency has available. The more realistic concern, according to Dalio's own framework, is the slow erosion of the dollar's value over time through the kind of money creation we talked about earlier. That's a very different, much less dramatic-sounding problem, but over years and decades, it adds up in a way that quietly reshapes your retirement plans if you're not accounting for it. Think about compound interest like a snowball rolling downhill. At first, it seems small, almost not worth mentioning. But give it enough time and the right conditions, and it becomes unstoppable. That's true for your investments growing in your favor. And it's just as true, in reverse, for debt and inflation working against you if you're not paying attention. Both forces are patient. Both forces compound. The question is simply, which side of that snowball you're standing on. Before we wrap up, I want to be upfront with you, because I always want to be upfront with you. This is educational content based on general financial principles and my own experience in this space. I'm not your personal financial advisor, and I don't know your specific tax situation, your debt load, your family circumstances, or your risk tolerance. Before you make any major financial moves, restructuring your portfolio, paying off debt aggressively versus investing, changing your retirement contributions, please talk to a licensed financial professional who can look at your actual numbers. So let's bring this together. The big picture here isn't that the sky is falling tomorrow. It's that we're living through a structural shift in how the U.S. economy is financed, driven by a level of government debt and interest cost that hasn't been seen in this combination before, at least not in most of our lifetimes. The smart response isn't panic. It's preparation. Build a real emergency fund and put it somewhere it can actually earn something. Stay invested for the long term instead of trying to time headlines. Max out the tax-advantaged accounts available to you, especially anything with an employer match. And diversify like you mean it instead of chasing whatever's exciting this month. None of this requires you to be wealthy already. It requires you to be consistent, starting now with whatever you have. If any part of this resonated with you, or if you've got questions I didn't get to, drop them in the comments below. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to know what's on your mind when it comes to your money right now. If you want more honest, no fluff finance content like this, content that respects your intelligence instead of just trying to scare you into clicking, hitting subscribe is the best way to make sure you don't miss what's coming next. In my next video, I'm going to break down something that even a lot of experienced investors get wrong when it comes to retirement withdrawals. And I promise you, even if you think you already understand it, there's an angle here you probably haven't seen explained this clearly before. Until then, take care of your money and take care of yourself.